cold winter night, the December wind howled through the narrow streets of downtown Chicago, carrying with it the promise of another harsh winter. Inside the cramped apartment on Maple Street, 23-year-old Emma Sullivan sat quietly. In the corner, mending a torn sweater by the dim light of an old lamp, her fingers worked carefully, each stitch precise despite the cold that made them stiff and clumsy. The apartment felt smaller tonight, filled with tension that had nothing to do with the weather outside. Emma could hear her stepsister Natalie, pacing back and forth in the next room, her heels clicking against the wooden floor like an angry metronome. Every few minutes, Natalie's voice would rise in frustration, followed by the soothing tones of their stepmother Rebecca, trying to calm her down. Emma had learned long ago to make herself invisible during these family storms. She pulled her knees up to her chest and continued sewing, hoping whatever crisis had erupted would pass without involving her. But deep down, she knew that hope was foolish. In the Sullivan household, Emma was always the solution to everyone else's problems. The door to the living room burst open, and Natalie stormed in, her perfectly styled blonde hair slightly disheveled and her blue eyes blazing with anger. She was dressed in an expensive red dress that Emma knew cost more than what Emma earned in 2 months working at the local diner. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Natalie declared, throwing herself onto the couch with dramatic flair. "How I supposed to go on a date with some boring businessman when Connor just asked me to his company's New Year's party? Do you know how important Connor is? His father owns half the restaurants in the city." Rebecca followed close behind, her hands wringing together in the way they did. Whenever she was trying to solve a problem that threatened her carefully constructed social climbing plans. At 52, Rebecca Sullivan had perfected the art of appearing concerned while calculating the best advantage for herself and her daughter. "Sweetheart, we've been through this," Rebecca said, her voice strained with forced patience. "Mr. Thompson specifically arranged this introduction. He said this Harrison man is very successful, very eligible. Can't simply cancel without looking. Terribly rude." "Then you go," Natalie snapped, crossing her arms. "I'm not wasting my time with some random guy when I have a real opportunity with Connor." Emma tried to focus on her sewing, but she could feel the familiar dread building in her stomach. She knew that look in Rebecca's eyes, the calculating expression that meant Emma was about to become part of whatever scheme was brewing. "Of course," Rebecca said slowly, as if the idea was just occurring to her. Emma could go instead. Both. Women turned to look at Emma, who finally looked up from her sewing. Her heart sank as she saw the expectant expressions on their faces. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a decision that had already been made for her. "I don't think that's a good idea," Emma said quietly, setting down her needle. "He's expecting Natalie, not me. Wouldn't it be better to just reschedule?" Natalie laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. "Please, Emma, it's just dinner. Sit there, smile politely, and make sure he doesn't feel completely stood up. How hard can that be? But what if he asks questions? What if he realizes I'm not who he thinks I am?" Rebecca waved her hand dismissively. "You don't need to pretend to be Natalie. Just go as yourself. Tell him there was a family emergency and you came in her place. Men appreciate that kind of family loyalty." Emma wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the ways this plan could go wrong, but she knew it would be useless. In this house, her opinions rarely mattered. She was the charity case, the stepdaughter, who should be grateful for having a roof over her head and food on her table. "Fine," Emma said softly, folding her sewing and setting it aside. "What time and where?" 7 o'clock at Romano's," Rebecca said, already looking relieved. "It's that new Italian place downtown. Very upscale. So wear something nice." Emma nodded, though they all knew her definition of nice was quite different from theirs. While Natalie's closet overflowed with designer clothes, Emma owned exactly 3 dresses that could be considered appropriate for anything fancier than her job at the diner. 2 hours later, Emma stood in front of the cracked mirror in her tiny bedroom, trying to make herself presentable. She had chosen her navy blue dress, the one she had bought secondhand 3 years ago for a job interview. It was simple and modest, with long sleeves that covered the small scar on her left arm from a childhood accident. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a low bun. She had applied the minimal makeup she owned with careful precision. Looking at her reflection, Emma couldn't help but think about how different she and Natalie were. Where Natalie was bold and confident, Emma was quiet and reserved. Where Natalie commanded attention, Emma preferred to blend into the background. They might share a father, but that seemed to be where their similarities ended. The taxi ride to Romano's gave Emma 20 minutes to worry about everything that could go wrong. What if this Harrison man was expecting someone glamorous and sophisticated? What if he was angry about being deceived? What if he was one of those entitled rich men who looked down on people like her? Romano's turned out to be even fancier than Emma had imagined. The restaurant occupied the ground floor of a gleaming Harrah's building with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the Chicago skyline. Warm golden light spilled from the interior, and Emma could see well-dressed couples dining at tables adorned with white linens and fresh flowers. She paid the taxi driver with money Rebecca had reluctantly given her and stood on the sidewalk. For a moment, gathering her courage. The December air was bitter cold, and she pulled her thin coat tighter around her shoulders. It wasn't designer like the coats she saw other patrons wearing, but it was clean and presentable. The hostess greeted Emma with a professional smile and checked the reservation list. "You must be here for Mr. Harrison," she said, leading Emma through the restaurant toward a secluded corner table. Emma's nervousness increased with each step. The restaurant was filled with the kind of people she only saw in movies or magazines. Wealthy couples who looked completely at ease in their expensive surroundings. She felt like an imposter, a fact that became even more apparent when she saw the man waiting at the corner table. James Harrison was not at all what Emma had expected. She had imagined someone older, perhaps pompous, or obviously wealthy. Instead, she found herself looking at a man who appeared to be in his early 30s. With dark hair and kind eyes that seemed to take in everything around him with quiet intelligence, he was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. But he wore it with an ease that suggested he was comfortable in expensive clothes, without being defined by them. There was something about his posture, the way he stood to greet her, that spoke of confidence without arrogance. But what surprised Emma most was the small girl sitting beside him at the table. She couldn't be more than 6 years old, with long, dark hair tied back in a neat ponytail and serious brown eyes that watched Emma's approach with curious interest. "Miss Sullivan?" James asked, extending his hand with a warm smile. "Actually," Emma began, accepting his handshake and noticing how warm and steady his grip was. "I'm Emma Sullivan. I'm Natalie's sister. There was a family situation, and I came in her place. I hope that's all right." She waited for his expression to change, for disappointment or annoyance to replace the welcome in his eyes. Instead, James simply nodded and gestured to the chair across from him. "Of course," he said. "I appreciate you coming on such short notice. This is my daughter, Lily." The little girl looked up at Emma with the kind of direct gaze that children possess, unfiltered by adult pretenses. "Are you going to have dinner with us?" she asked. "That's okay with you," Emma replied, sitting down carefully and smoothing her dress under the table. Lily considered this for a moment, then nodded solemnly. "Daddy said we might make a new friend tonight. Are you going to be our friend?" The simple question, asked with such innocent hope, made Emma's throat tighten unexpectedly. When was the last time someone had wanted to be her friend? When was the last time she had felt wanted anywhere? "I'd like that very much," Emma answered honestly. As the evening progressed, Emma found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't expected. James was nothing like the men Natalie usually dated, guys who talked constantly about themselves and their achievements. He asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely interested in Emma's answers. When she mentioned working at Murphy's diner, he didn't look down on her or change the subject. Instead, he asked about her favorite customers and whether she enjoyed the work. When Lily grew restless, waiting for their food, Emma quietly pulled out a small notebook from her purse and began sketching funny animals, making the little girl giggle with delight. "You're very good with children," James observed, watching as Emma drew a giraffe wearing a top hat. I used to babysit a lot when I was younger, Emma explained, adding spots to the giraffe's neck. Children are honest. They don't pretend to be something they're not. There was something in her tone that made James study her more carefully. He noticed the way she seemed surprised by small acts of courtesy, like when he held her chair or asked for her coat. He saw how she automatically chose the least expensive items on the menu, and how she lit up when Lily laughed at her drawings. Most of all, he noticed how natural and unforced her kindness seemed to be. In his world of corporate negotiations and social climbing, genuine warmth was rare enough to be treasured when found. "What do you like to do when you're not working?" James asked, as they shared dessert. Emma considered the question seriously. "I read a lot, old books mostly from the library. And I volunteer at the children's hospital sometimes, reading stories to the kids who have to stay there for a long time." "That must be rewarding," James said, and Emma could tell he meant it. "It is," she agreed. "Some of those children are so brave, dealing with things that would challenge adults. They've taught me a lot about what really matters in life." As the evening drew to a close, James insisted on driving both Emma and Lily home. The luxury sedan was warm and comfortable, a stark contrast to the harsh winter night outside. Had fallen asleep in her car seat, exhausted by the excitement of the evening. "Thank you for tonight," James said quietly as they pulled up in front of Emma's apartment building. "I know you didn't plan to be here, but I'm glad you came." Emma looked at the modest building where she lived, suddenly seeing it through his eyes. The paint was peeling in places, and one of the front steps was cracked. It was a world away from the elegant restaurant they had just left, but James's expression didn't change. "Thank you for dinner," Emma replied, "and for letting me spend time with Lily. She's a wonderful little girl." "She likes you," James said. "That's not always easy to achieve. Lily can be quite particular about people." As Emma walked up the steps to her building, she could feel James watching to make sure she got inside safely. It was a small gesture, but one that warmed her more than her thin coat ever could. In her tiny bedroom, Emma carefully hung up her dress and sat on her bed, replaying the evening in her mind. For 3 hours, she had felt like someone worth knowing, someone whose thoughts and opinions mattered. It was a feeling she wanted to hold on to, even though she knew it was unlikely she would see James and Lily again. Outside her window, the city sparkled in the cold winter night, full of possibilities she had never dared to imagine. And for the first time in years, Emma Sullivan allowed herself to dream about what might happen if someone actually saw her for who she was, rather than who she was supposed to be. Tomorrow she would go back to the diner, back to being invisible in her own family, back to accepting that she was meant for a life of service to others rather than happiness for herself. But tonight she had been Emma Sullivan, not just the poor relation or the substitute daughter. Tonight she had been enough exactly as she was. In a penthouse across the city, James Harrison sat in his study long after Lily had been tucked into bed, thinking about a young woman who drew giraffes in top hats and read stories to sick children, wondering how someone so genuine had ended up feeling like she needed to apologize for existing. The snow began to fall again outside his window, blanketing the city in pristine white, as if offering the promise of fresh starts and new beginnings to anyone brave enough to believe in them. The morning after the morning sun filtered through the frost-covered windows of Murphy's Diner, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Emma moved between tables with practiced efficiency, refilling coffee cups and clearing plates, while her mind remained firmly planted in the previous evening. Every few minutes, she would catch herself smiling at the memory of Lily's laughter, or the way James had listened to her stories with such genuine interest. "Emma, table 6 needs their check," called out Martha, the head waitress who had worked at Murphy's for over 20 years. Her weathered face showed concern as she noticed Emma's distracted state. "You okay, honey? You seem a million miles away today." "Just tired," Emma replied, though the truth was, she felt more awake than she had in months. Something about the previous evening had stirred something inside her, a feeling she couldn't quite name but didn't want to lose. The diner's bell chimed as a customer entered, and Emma looked up from wiping down a table to see a familiar small figure bundled in a bright purple coat. Her heart skipped as Lily Harrison spotted her and broke into a wide grin. "Emma," Lily called out, tugging on the hand of the tall man beside her. "Daddy, it's Emma from last night." James appeared behind his daughter, looking slightly embarrassed but pleased. He was dressed more casually today in dark jeans and a navy sweater that made his eyes look even warmer than Emma remembered. "I hope we're not bothering you at work," James said, as Emma approached their table by the window. "Lily insisted we try Murphy's famous pancakes after you mentioned them last night." Emma felt her cheeks warm with pleasure. "You're not bothering me at all? Let me get you some menus." As she served them breakfast, Emma noticed how James interacted with the other customers and staff. He greeted Martha with the same courtesy he had shown her, and when old Mr. Peterson from Table 3 accidentally knocked over his water glass, James quietly helped clean it up without being asked. "Daddy," Lily announced between bites of pancake, "Emma makes the best animal drawings. Can you show him the one you made me last night?" Emma glanced around the diner, making sure her tables were taken care of, then pulled out her small notebook and quickly sketched a smiling elephant wearing a tutu. Lily giggled with delight, and James watched with fascination as Emma's simple lines brought the whimsical character to life. "You have real talent," James said quietly. "Have you ever thought about pursuing art professionally?" Tucking the notebook back into her apron. "It's just something I do for fun. Not really practical for someone in my situation." There was something in her tone that made James want to ask more questions, but before he could, Emma was called away. To help another customer? He watched her work, noting how she remembered everyone's preferences, how she had a kind word for the elderly customers and patience with the demanding ones. "She's nice," Lily observed, following her father's gaze. "Not like the other ladies you have dinner with?" James raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? The other ones always want to talk to you, not to me." "Emma talks to both of us, and she doesn't smell like too much flowers." Before James could respond to his daughter's surprisingly astute observation, his phone buzzed with an urgent message. From his assistant? Crisis at one of his companies required his immediate attention. But as he looked at Lily happily finishing her pancakes and Emma refilling their coffee cups with a warm smile, he found himself reluctant to leave. The Revelation 3. Days passed before Emma saw James and Lily again. This time, they appeared at the children's hospital during her volunteer shift. And Emma's surprise was evident as she looked up from the book she was reading to a group of young patients. "Mr. Harrison?" she said, carefully closing the book and standing up. "What brings you here?" James smiled, but there was something different about his expression today, more serious than before. "I wanted to see you in action," he said simply. "Lily hasn't stopped talking about your animal drawings. And when I mentioned you volunteer here, she insisted we come visit." The children in the hospital playroom immediately gravitated toward Lily, drawn by her infectious enthusiasm and the bag of art supplies James had brought. Emma watched as the little girl, despite being younger than most of the patients, naturally took on a leadership role, organizing games and sharing her crayons with generous abandon. "She's special," Emma observed, settling beside James on one of the small plastic chairs that was clearly not designed for adults. "She is," James agreed, his voice filled with pride and something else Emma couldn't identify. "She's been through a lot for someone so young." Emma wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his expression told her now wasn't the time. Instead, she focused on helping the children with their art projects, showing them how to turn simple shapes into elaborate stories. As the afternoon progressed, Emma began to notice things that puzzled her. Several hospital staff members greeted James by name, not in the casual way they might remember a frequent visitor, but with the kind of deference usually reserved for important people. When Dr. Rodriguez, the head of pediatric oncology, stopped by to chat, spoke to James about hospital expansion plans and new equipment purchases with a familiarity that suggested these weren't casual conversations. "Mr. Harrison," Dr. Rodriguez said as the visit was winding down, "the new MRI machine you donated is already making such a difference. We can't thank you enough for your generosity." Emma felt something cold settle in her stomach. Donated. As in James had purchased an MRI machine for the hospital. Those cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, didn't they? To the children, James walked Emma to the hospital's main entrance, Lily skipping ahead of them and chattering about all the friends she had made. "Emma," James began, his tone careful, "there's something I need to tell you." But before he could continue, Emma's phone rang with a call from Rebecca. Even from several feet away, James could hear the angry voice on the other end of the line. "Where have you been?" Rebecca demanded. "Natalie needs you to cover her shift at the boutique, and you're nowhere to be found. And another thing," Mr. Thompson called. "He's been asking questions about you and that Harrison man." "What exactly did you tell him?" Emma's face went pale. "Didn't tell him anything inappropriate, I promise. We just had dinner and just dinner." Rebecca's voice rose to a near shriek. "Emma, do you have any idea who James Harrison is?" Emma looked at James, who was watching her with an expression of resigned understanding, as if he had been expecting this moment. "He's Harrison Industries," Rebecca continued, her voice now dangerously quiet. "Hotels, restaurants, real estate, development. The man is worth billions, Emma. Billions. And you went to dinner with him dressed like... Emma ended the call with shaking hands, her face burning with embarrassment. She couldn't bring herself to look at James directly. "You're a billionaire," she said quietly, the words feeling strange on her tongue. "Among other things," James replied gently.
Yes.
"Does that change anything?" Emma thought about all the small kindnesses he had shown her, the way he had treated her. With respect, even when she was just a waitress at a diner, the patience he had shown with the children at the hospital. "It explains a lot," she said finally. "Why everyone here knows you. Why you can afford to donate medical equipment. Why my stepmother's probably having a panic attack right now," Emma James said, stepping closer. "I need you to know that. My interest in you has nothing to do with charity or pity. You're one of the most genuine people I've ever met." Emma was already backing away, her mind racing with implications. "This is impossible," she murmured. "I'm a diner waitress who lives in a one-bedroom apartment and mends her clothes because she can't afford new ones. You live in a different world entirely." Daddy Lily interrupted, tugging on James's sleeve. "Why does Emma look sad? Did we say something wrong?" Emma knelt down to Lily's level, her heart breaking at the concern in the little girl's eyes. "You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart. You and your daddy are wonderful. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated things to figure out." As Emma walked away from the hospital, she could hear Lily asking James why Emma had left so suddenly. The sound of the little girl's confused voice followed Emma all the way to the bus stop, where she sat on the cold bench and tried to process everything that had happened. The distance grows the next 2 weeks passed in a blur of awkward family dinners and uncomfortable conversations. Rebecca had wasted no time in calling everyone she knew to share the news that Emma had somehow managed to meet James Harrison. The attention made Emma deeply uncomfortable. "Could have set Natalie up perfectly," Rebecca complained over dinner one evening. "Instead, you somehow managed to make him interested in you, of all people. Do you understand what an opportunity you've wasted?" "I didn't waste anything," Emma replied quietly, pushing food around her plate. "And I didn't try to make him interested in me. We just talked." Natalie laughed harshly. "Right, because billionaires always fall for poor girls in cheap dresses. What did you do, Emma? Did you tell him some sob story about our family situation?" "I barely mentioned our family at all," Emma said, her patience finally wearing thin. "Maybe he was just being polite." But even as she said the words, Emma knew they weren't entirely true. There had been something in James's eyes, a warmth and interest that felt genuine. The problem was that now she knew about the enormous gap between their lives. She couldn't stop thinking about all the ways she didn't belong in his world. James had tried to call several times, leaving voicemails that Emma listened to but couldn't bring herself to return. What was the point? Even if his interest was genuine, what kind of future could they possibly have together? Meanwhile, across the city, James was dealing with his own family complications. His mother, Catherine Harrison, had flown in from New York specifically to discuss what she called this situation with the inappropriate young woman.
"James, darling," she said over lunch at the country club, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from decades of managing social expectations. "I understand.
You're lonely since Patricia left, but surely you can see that this girl is entirely unsuitable." "Mother," James replied patiently, cutting his daughter's sandwich into triangles while she colored in her activity book. Emma is kind, intelligent, and wonderful with Lily. What exactly makes her unsuitable? Catherine waved her hand dismissively. She works in a diner, James. She has no education, no social connections, no understanding of our world. And let's not forget that she deceived you from the very beginning by pretending to be someone else. She never pretended to be anyone else, James corrected firmly. She was honest about who she was from the moment we met. Still, Catherine continued, you have responsibilities to consider. Your position in society, Lily's future, the family, reputation. You can't seriously be considering a relationship with someone so far beneath your station. Lily looked up from her coloring, her young face serious. Grandma, Emma isn't beneath anything. She's the nicest person I know. Catherine's expression softened slightly when she looked at her granddaughter, but her resolve remained firm. Sweetheart, there are things about the adult world that you don't understand yet. Sometimes we have to make difficult choices.
That
Evening, James sat in his home office, staring at his phone and debating whether to try calling Emma again. He understood why she was pulling away, could see how overwhelming the revelation of his wealth must have been for her. But he also knew that what they had shared had been real, and he wasn't ready to give up on it. The breaking point. The crisis came on a snowy Thursday evening when Emma was working a late shift at the diner. She had just finished cleaning the coffee machine when Martha approached her with a concerned expression. Emma, honey, there's someone here to see you, Martha said. Nodding toward the front entrance, Emma looked up to see Natalie standing by the door, dressed in an expensive coat and looking completely out of place in the humble diner. Her face was flushed with cold and anger, and Emma could tell immediately that this wasn't a social visit. We need to talk, Natalie said, without preamble. Now Emma glanced around the diner, noting that there were still several customers finishing their meals. I can't leave right now. My shift doesn't end for another hour. Just can't wait, Natalie insisted, her voice rising slightly. Do you have any idea what you've done to our family? Martha stepped forward, her protective instincts kicking in. Ladies, I'm going to have to ask you to keep your voices down or take this conversation outside. Reluctantly, Emma grabbed her coat and followed Natalie out into the snowy parking lot behind the diner. The cold air bit at her face, but it was nothing compared to the chill in her sister's expression. Connor broke up with me, Natalie announced without warning. His family heard about you and James Harrison, and they think our whole family is social climbing opportunists trying to manipulate wealthy men. Emma felt sick to her stomach. Natalie, I never meant for any of this to happen. I didn't even know who James was when I met him. That's exactly the problem, Natalie exploded. You stumbled into this completely by accident, and now you're ruining it for everyone. Do you know what people are saying? They're calling you a gold digger, saying you seduced a billionaire by playing innocent and helpless. That's not true, Emma said quietly, but even as she spoke, she could hear how the situation might look to outside observers. It doesn't matter what's true, Natalie continued ruthlessly. It matters what people believe. And right now, they believe that you're using your sob story to manipulate James Harrison. Mother is beside herself. She's gotten calls from 3 different society ladies, asking about our family's situation. Emma wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off both the cold and the growing sense of hopelessness. Everything Natalie was saying confirmed her own worst fears about the impossibility of a relationship with James. What do you want me to do? Emma asked finally. End it, Natalie said firmly. Whatever game you're playing with him, stop it now. Tell him you're not interested, that you made a mistake. Do whatever you have to do to make him leave you alone. And if I don't, Natalie's expression hardened. Then you'll need to find somewhere else to live. Mother isn't going to support someone who's actively damaging our family's reputation. Nice. Natalie drove away, leaving Emma standing alone in the snowy parking lot. Emma realized that she had reached a crossroads. She could continue trying to build something with James, knowing it would cost her the only family she had left, even if they didn't always treat her well. Or she could protect herself and them by walking away from the best thing that had ever happened to her. The choice, when she really thought about it, wasn't much of a choice at all. The final goodbye. Ma's hands trembled as she dialed James's number that Friday evening. Her heart pounding so hard she was sure he would be able to hear it through the phone. She had spent the entire day rehearsing what she would say, but now that the moment had arrived, The words felt impossible to speak. "Emma," James's voice was warm with surprise and relief when he answered. "I was beginning to worry when you didn't return my calls. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Emma lied, closing her eyes and forcing herself to continue. "James, I need to talk to you about us, about what happened between us." There was a pause, and when James spoke again, his tone was more cautious. "Of course."
How would you?
"Like to meet somewhere? Or would you prefer to talk on the phone?" "Phone is better," Emma said quickly. She knew that if she saw his face, or worse, if Lily was there, she would lose her resolve entirely. "James, I've been thinking a lot about our situation, and I think we should stop seeing each other." The silence that followed was so complete that Emma wondered if the call had been disconnected. Finally, James spoke, his voice carefully controlled. "Can you tell me why?" Emma had prepared for this question, had practiced the words that would end things cleanly and finally. "We're from completely different worlds," she said, the rehearsed phrases feeling like sandpaper in her throat. "I don't belong in your life, and I think we both know that whatever this was between us, it can't work in the real world," Emma James said gently. "If this is about the money, about my family's reaction to us, we can work through that. I don't care what anyone else thinks." "But I do," Emma replied, and for the first time, some genuine emotion crept into her voice. "I care that your mother thinks I'm a gold digger. I care that people are calling me a social climber. I care that my own family is being judged because of me. This isn't just about us, James. Our choices affect other people." "So you're giving up," James said, and there was a note of something that might have been disappointment in his voice. "You're letting other people's opinions make your decisions for you." The words stung because they were partially true, but Emma forced herself to continue. "I'm being realistic. You're James Harrison. You can have anyone you want. Someone who fits into your world, who knows how to navigate your social circles. Someone who won't embarrass you at business dinners or charity galas. Is that really what you think?" James asked quietly. "That you would embarrass me?" Emma's resolve wavered at the genuine hurt in his voice, but she steeled herself and continued. "I think you're a good man who deserves someone better suited to your life than a diner waitress who doesn't even own a dress appropriate for your world." "Emma," James began, but she cut him off. "Please don't make this harder than it already is," she said, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Just take care of yourself and Lily. You both deserve all the happiness in the world," she ended. The call before he could respond, then immediately turned off her phone and buried it in the bottom of her dresser drawer. The silence in her tiny bedroom felt overwhelming, broken only by the sound of her own muffled sobs. The downward spiral, the weeks that followed, were some of the darkest Emma had ever experienced. She threw herself into work, taking on extra shifts at the diner and volunteering additional hours at the hospital, anything to keep her mind occupied. But no amount of busy work could fill the hollow ache that had settled in her chest. Martha noticed the change immediately. "Honey, you're working yourself to death," she said one afternoon, watching Emma methodically clean tables that were already spotless. "What's eating at you?" "Nothing," Emma replied automatically, but Martha had known her too long to be fooled.
Always.
"This about that man who was in here with his little girl? It's a handsome one who looked at you like you hung the moon?" Emma's hands stilled on the table she was wiping. "Doesn't matter anymore. That's over. It's over because you wanted it to be. Or over because someone told you it should be." Emma didn't answer, but Martha could see the truth in her expression. The older woman shook her head sadly and returned to her own work. But Emma could feel her concerned gaze throughout the rest of the shift. At home, things weren't much better. Rebecca was pleased that Emma had come to her senses, but Natalie remained coldly distant, still angry about her breakup with Connor. The apartment felt smaller than ever, filled with unspoken resentments and careful politeness that was somehow worse than open hostility. One evening, as Emma sat alone in her room reading a library book she couldn't concentrate on, she heard Natalie on the phone in the next room. "No, it's completely over," Natalie was saying, presumably to one of her friends. Emma realized she was being ridiculous, thinking she could actually have a relationship with someone like James Harrison. I mean, really, what was she thinking? The man probably just felt sorry for her. Each word was like a small knife, confirming every insecurity Emma had about the situation. Maybe Natalie was right. Maybe James's interest had been nothing more than pity for a sad girl in a cheap dress. The emergency everything changed on a cold Tuesday morning in February. When Emma's phone rang at 6 a.m., she had only recently started turning it on again, mostly, so the hospital could reach her for volunteer shifts. And she answered groggily, expecting to hear from Dr. Rodriguez about schedule changes. Instead, she heard James's voice, strained with panic and exhaustion. "Emma, I'm sorry to call you so early, but I didn't know who else to turn to. Lily is in the hospital. She collapsed yesterday afternoon, and the doctors are running tests, but she keeps asking for you. I know you said you didn't want to see us anymore, but she's scared, and you're the only person besides me who can calm her down." Emma was already reaching for her clothes before James finished speaking. "Which hospital?" she asked, all thoughts of their painful goodbye forgotten in the face of Lily's need. "Children's Memorial, the same one where you volunteer." "No, I have no right to ask this of you, but please." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Emma said, not bothering to listen to the rest of his request. She threw on the first clothes she could find and caught the earliest bus across town. Racing with worry. What could have happened to make a healthy 6-year-old collapse? The questions multiplied during the endless bus ride, each possibility more frightening than the last. The pediatric intensive care unit was quieter than the regular children's ward where Emma usually volunteered. She found James in the family waiting area, slumped in an uncomfortable plastic chair with his head in his hands. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his usually perfect appearance disheveled and worn. "James," she said softly, and he looked up with an expression of such relief and gratitude that it nearly broke her heart. "Thank you for coming," he said, standing and reaching toward her as if to embrace her, then stopping himself as he remembered their last conversation. "The doctors think it might be her heart. She was born with a minor defect that we've been monitoring, but they're concerned it may be getting worse." Emma felt the world tilt slightly. "Can I see her?" "She's sleeping right now, but yes. She woke up a few times asking for you specifically. I think she was afraid you had disappeared forever." Emma followed James down a corridor lined with windows looking into individual patient rooms. In the third room on the right, she could see Lily's small form dwarfed by the hospital bed, connected to monitors and 4 lines that seemed impossibly large for such a tiny person. "Oh, sweetheart," Emma whispered, pressing her hand against the glass. As if sensing her presence, Lily stirred and opened her eyes. When she saw Emma standing in the doorway, her pale face lit up with the first real smile James had seen since the ordeal began. "Emma," Lily called out weakly, trying to sit up. "Daddy said you might not come because you were mad at us." Emma was at her bedside in an instant, carefully taking the little girl's hand in hers. "I could never be mad at you, Lily. Never. I'm sorry I stayed away for so long. Are you going to stay now?" Lily asked, her voice small and hopeful. "Scared you decided you didn't want to be our friend anymore?" Emma glanced at James, who was watching them with an expression she couldn't read. "I'm going to stay as long as you need me to," she promised. The vigil for the next 3 days, Emma barely left the hospital. She took indefinite leave from the diner, despite knowing she couldn't afford the lost income, and arranged for other volunteers to cover her regular shifts. Nothing mattered except being there for Lily. The little girl's condition stabilized, but the doctors wanted to keep her for observation while they determined whether surgery would be necessary to repair the heart defect that was causing her symptoms. Emma spent hours reading to Lily, playing quiet games, and helping her with art projects using supplies James brought from home. "You don't have to do this," James told her on the second night, when he found her sleeping in the uncomfortable chair beside Lily's bed. "I can hire professional caregivers." "I don't want professional caregivers," came Lily's sleepy voice from the bed. "I want Emma." Emma stretched, working out the kinks in her neck from sleeping in the chair. "I want to be here," she told James honestly. "This is where I belong right now." It was during the long, quiet hours of that vigil that Emma and James began to talk again, really talk, about everything that had driven them apart. With Lily sleeping peacefully between them, the barriers they had built seemed less important than the connection they had discovered. "I was a coward," Emma admitted on the third night, when Lily was finally sleeping deeply after a day of medical procedures. I let other people's opinions matter more than what I felt for you. You were protecting yourself, James replied gently. I understand that. I should have handled the whole situation better, been more sensitive to how overwhelming it must have been to learn about my background. Your mother was right, though, Emma said, looking down at her hands. We are from different worlds. Don't know anything about charity galas or business dinners, or the kind of life you live. James was quiet for a long moment, watching his daughter sleep. Do you know why Patricia left? He asked finally. Emma shook her head, surprised by the change of subject. She said she never signed up to be a single mother. After my accident, when I couldn't work for several months and needed physical therapy, when Lily was going through her terrible twos and I was struggling to balance everything, Patricia decided our life was too difficult, too ordinary. She wanted glamour and excitement, not dirty diapers and sleepless nights. Emma felt a surge of anger on his behalf. That's horrible. How could she abandon you both when you needed her most? The point is, James continued, I learned that all the money in the world doesn't guarantee that someone will love you when things get difficult. But you're here, Emma, when my daughter needed you. When I was falling apart with worry, you dropped everything and came running. That tells me everything I need to know about who you really are. Before Emma could respond, Lily stirred in her bed. Opening her eyes and looking at both adults with serious consideration, Are you talking about mushy grown-up stuff? Making both Emma and James laugh despite their exhaustion. Maybe a little, James admitted. How are you feeling, Princess? Better, Lily said, then looked directly at Emma. Are you going to marry Daddy? Emma felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. Lily, that's not really... Is because I think you should? Lily continued matter-of-factly. You make him smile, and you make me happy, and we both love you a lot. Emma looked at James, who was watching her with an expression of hope and vulnerability that took her breath away. Out of the mouths of babes, he said softly. The new beginning, Dar. Rodriguez delivered the good news on Friday morning. Lily's heart defect was minor enough that surgery wouldn't be necessary, but she would need regular monitoring and some lifestyle modifications. More importantly, she was ready to go home. As Emma helped Lily pack her few belongings from the hospital room, she realized that she had a decision to make. The crisis was over, which meant she could return to her old life. Her old patterns of staying in the background and accepting whatever scraps of happiness came her way. Or she could be brave enough to reach for something more, Emma James said. As they waited for the discharge paperwork, I know we have a lot to figure out. But I hope you know that what Lily said in there about us loving you, that's true. At least it's true for me. Emma looked at this man who had somehow seen past all her insecurities and defenses to the person she was underneath. Then she looked at Lily, who was humming happily while organizing her get-well cards completely, confident that the adults in her life would work everything out. I love you too, Emma said quietly, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. Both of you. I don't know how to be part of your world, James, but I'm willing to learn if you're patient with me. James's smile was brighter than the February sun streaming through the hospital windows. We'll figure it out together, he promised, taking her hand in his. All of us. 6 months later, Emma stood in front of a different mirror in a different mirror room, wearing a dress that fit perfectly and cost more than she used to make in a year. But the woman looking back at her was still recognizably Emma Sullivan. It's just Emma, who had learned to believe she deserved love and happiness. The charity gala. That evening would be her first major public appearance as James Harrison's girlfriend, and she was nervous, but no longer terrified. She had spent the past months learning about James's business interests, his philanthropic commitments, and the social expectations that came with his position. More importantly, she had learned that being true to herself was more valuable than trying to become someone else. You look beautiful, James said, appearing in the doorway with Lily, who was dressed in a miniature version of Emma's elegant blue gown. We all look beautiful, Lily announced, twirling so her skirt spun around her, like a family. As they walked into the glittering ballroom together, Emma felt the curious stares and heard the whispered conversations. She knew that some people would always see her as the poor girl who got lucky, the waitress who somehow managed to catch a billionaire's attention. But she also knew that the people who truly mattered, the ones who had come to know her over the past months, saw her as she really was, a woman who loved deeply, gave generously, and had finally learned to believe in her own worth. When James took her hand for their first dance, spinning her around the floor, while Lily watched from a nearby table with Catherine Harrison, who had gradually warmed to Emma after seeing how happy she made James and Lily, Emma realized that fairy tales weren't about perfect people living perfect lives. They were about ordinary people who found the courage to believe in extraordinary love. The music swelled around them, and James pulled her closer, whispering in her ear, "No regrets." Emma looked around the ballroom, at the life she was building with this man and his daughter, at the future stretching out ahead of them, full of challenges and joys she could never have imagined. "Not a single one," she whispered back, meaning every word. And as they danced beneath the crystal chandeliers, surrounded by the kind of luxury she was still learning to navigate but no longer feared, Emma Sullivan knew that sometimes the most unlikely love stories were the ones that changed everything. Not because they were perfect, but because they were real, in the end. That was all that mattered. The reality of love that saw past differences in bank accounts and social status, too. The hearts that beat in perfect rhythm, creating a melody that would last a lifetime. The poor girl who had taken her sister's place on a date had found something infinitely more valuable than money or status. She had found a family that chose her, loved her, would never let her go, and in that love she had finally found herself.